And here it stops in just a moment. Ugh, that abrupt cutoff gets me every time. Well, if you're listening, welcome to the stream. Tonight it is February 14th, 2019. Hello, Tyler. Thanks for coming on the stream again. Last time on the stream, we did some stuff. If you are watching live, feel free to pop in the chat and say something. Last week, we read The Lady or the Tiger, a short story, talked a little bit about ambiguity, and read A Rose for Emily. There were some interesting short stories. Some of them, however, were a little, well, either a little long or maybe just a little politically charged. But there were a couple that I think I would like to maybe look over. We'll see how that goes. For right now, though, let's take a look at the Wikipedia front page for tonight. Today's featured article is The Cadaver Tomb of René Chalon, a Gothic funerary monument in the Church of Saint Etienne at Bar-le-Duc in northeastern France. I'm sure that I'm mispronouncing that. It consists of an altarpiece and a limestone statue of a petrified and skinless corpse which stands upright. Its left arm is raised as if gesturing towards heaven. Interesting. Unusually for contemporary objects of this type, the skeleton is standing, making it a living corpse, as innovation that was to become highly influential. In the news, we have Omar al-Bashir, who is deposed as the president of Sudan in a coup d'etat after nearly 30 years in office amidst mass protest against his government. The WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, was arrested by British authorities after Ecuador withdrew his asylum. Recently, the Event Horizon Telescope published the first direct image of a black hole. And there has been a new identified species in the genus of Homo, which is similar to human beings, or the species of human beings, I suppose. The genus of human beings? Truth be told, I was never very good at science, and so I wouldn't know the terminology. On this day in history, April 15th, it was the Day of the Sun in North Korea. It is Patriots' Day in various United States. Tax Day as well in the United States. In 1638, a rebellion by Catholic Japanese peasants in Shimabara over increased taxes was put down by the Tokugawa shogunate, resulting in a greater enforcement of the policy of national seclusion. In 1912, the passenger liner RMS Titanic sank about 2 hours and 40 minutes after colliding with an iceberg, killing more than 1,500 people. In 1952, the B-52 Stratofortress, a long-range subsonic jet-powered strategic bomber operated by the United States Air Force for most of the aircraft's history, made its first flight. Tyler says science is for nerds, and I would wholeheartedly agree. I am not a nerd. Instead, I am a normal person that likes to read for random people on the internet and is obsessed with fantasy and literary history, like a normal person. It's basically like playing a sport. Um, so for today, I did have a few short stories to read that were leftovers from last time. Um, there was one called "A Good Man Is Hard to Find" and "The Most Dangerous Game," and another one called "Most Dangerous Game." I don't know exactly what either of the two are about. I don't know if they're any good. I haven't read them because I don't prepare for this stream, like a real professional. But before I did do that, actually, I at times like to read on the stream about um, uh, what would you call it? Some of the writings that I do, and occasionally I talk about my schoolwork and what have you. Today, I would like to do a little bit of both. I had a bit of homework in my communications class where we were expected to do an interview with someone in a prospective career field and find out what we can about it and do a paper on it. And so for me, I did that obviously. And for me, the reason I'm back in school is because I wanted to get a degree in English so as to help me become an editor, at least freelance, and maybe do that on the side of writing or alongside. That way I don't have to rely on one or the other, but that I can have both and hopefully potentially double my income. If not double it, then at least supplement it. And so I decided to go and take a look at editors for the sake of for my own sake and for the sake of the class. I was really glad to have this excuse to do this because it was something that I actually wanted to do as opposed to simply being a school project. It certainly isn't something I would be bold enough to do on my own, to have a full-scale interview with someone, and certainly not after what happened. Because what happened was, last year I met somebody at the Salt Lake City Comic Con. I won't mention his name or his company or anything like that, but he was a small-scale publisher, and I was talking to him, and I asked him, he's an editor or not an editor, but a writer and a publisher. And I asked him, I said, how did you get published? And he says, well, I didn't really. I just started my own publishing company. Not simply self-publishing in the sense that he, wrote a book and then put it on Amazon or what have you, but in the sense that he actually had printed copies, and he had quite a few of them. And he has an actual publishing company that's very selective, and they do all their things. And I bought a book from him, which he autographed, even though I didn't ask him to, which is nice. So I bought that from him. I have it sitting over yonder. I've read a little bit of it. I won't comment on it too much because I don't want to. I haven't really read too far into it, and I don't want to judge the guy. But I got his business card as well. And so, with that being the case, I took the time to, with this homework assignment, I decided that I would try and contact him and see if he'd be willing to do an interview. I didn't have his personal information, but I knew about his company, so I looked it up, found their website. They had a contact me little box, and I filled it out, explaining what was going on, explaining that I just wanted an hour interview, that I was on a deadline, obviously. I never heard back. even though this isn't like a particular, and part of the thing was I chose him and his company because I knew they were smaller scale. They're local to here in Utah, and I figured that that would be a great chance to find somebody who's a little smaller. Maybe they're not as busy, or at least they're a little more humble. They'd be willing to do the interview. I won't say that they're not humble or that they aren't busy. Um, Whatever the case is, I never got a response from them. At first, I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt, think that maybe they just didn't, maybe the contact me thing was broken or they just didn't check it that often. Whatever the case, I never got an email back from them, sadly. Um, Now, obviously, I can understand if someone's busy or what have you. The problem is that I was on a deadline, and I made my own assumption and assumed that I would at the very least get a response saying, unfortunately, I can't do this, or something of that nature. I never got an email confirming that they received my email or anything like that. Yeah, there was just no response. And but I figured, okay, I don't want to push it, don't want to make waves or do anything like that. So I decided to look it up and look up some other companies here in Utah, because the idea was to do a face-to-face interview if you could. Um, as it turns out, publishers are actually few and far in between. I mean, there's a number of them, but they're not usually here in Utah. I only saw like one company that was, aside from this guy, I only saw one company that I could find that was considered a fiction company. Something that, is something that I would actually want to get into, which I figured, I mean, perhaps I could have contacted like the newspaper or, some other publication and potentially gotten an interview with them. But I wanted to, get something that's something that I actually want, because what I want to do is genre fiction, obviously. But I only found one company in Utah that was within, reasonable distance, within like an hour's drive, that seemed like, or that met that criteria. And they were hiring for, well, not hiring, I guess, more selecting, because they don't pay for it, but they're looking for like interns. And I'd be happy to do that if I had more time personally, because I would love to get a look at the business. But, between work and school, I would not be able to afford rent if I were to do a paid internship, or I would keep working and doing what I'm doing and then fail or fall behind in my classes. Anyways, point is, so I sent them an email, explained what I was doing, kind of clarified some of the language a bit. Figured that maybe my other response was a little too familiar, maybe it wasn't professional enough. Sent them an email, just I need to interview somebody for my school project. Happy to meet you guys wherever you want. Do whatever. I am on a deadline. Please let me know. Send the email. No response. I don't know if I did something or if they just didn't want to respond. They're busy, whatever. Whatever the case, no response. And at this point, the deadline is getting nearer and nearer. So I'm kind of starting to panic. I'm like, well, this is two people in a row who, for whatever reason, aren't responding. I don't even know if they got my email, and I don't want to push it in case they did and they're just, for whatever reason, they don't want to respond. So I kind of panicked a little bit. I went on to the Editorial Freelancers Association, which is kind of the primo source of freelance editors, and probably what I'm going to be doing with my degree whenever I get my associates is probably sign up for them. I haven't signed up now, A, because I'm busy with school, and B, because you need to pay to be listed on there as a freelance editor. Which is all well and good, it helps keep the riffraff out or whatever. But I'm not going to pay for that and just so that I can put a listing as I don't have a college degree, but please pay me a certain amount to proofread your work. No one's going to do that, especially now when there's a plethora of other editors that are going to be chomping at the bit for the work, because it's a pretty competitive field. anyways, so I go on there and I'm starting to get desperate, and I think, okay, instead of just sending out one email, if I'm gonna get a good response here, uh, I need to be a little more proactive. Kimmery's in the chat. Hello, Kimmery. Thanks for coming on. Sounds like Shelby's here as well. Thank you both again for your support. Glad you could make it to the stream. Anyways, as I've been saying, so I looked up their listings. I just, grabbed 10 names that seemed like they would be willing to, that they were sort of my milieu, I guess. That is to say that they're like genre fiction and that sort of thing. So I found 10 people, 10 different freelance editors. I sent emails out to all of them. I received a response from 2 of those 10. And if you want to include the other 2 companies, I received 2 responses out of 14. So a 1 in 7 chance of actually getting a response. Thankfully, the responses I both got were both very nice people, both willing to, do the interview instead of just saying, oh, I can't, I'm busy or whatever, which that's fine. I'm not going to ask you to, I'm not going to expect you to do an interview for free, especially when your time is so important to you. I probably wouldn't even do that for free, but thankfully they at least responded. And so I I got these 2 responses, and I thought about it, and I was like, I only really need 1 interview, but both of these people are nice enough to actually respond when everyone else doesn't. And this is a career I actually genuinely want to know as much as I can about, because there's so much information out there that I need as much as I can get. So rather than doing 1 simple interview, I interviewed 2 people, and I'm gonna name them because obviously they're really cool people. The first kind of surprised me. Her name is Molly O'Donnell, PhD. And she's married. She's got kids, or at least 1, I think. I think she's fairly new into her marriage. Probably less than 10 years or so, or about thereabouts. The reason I mention that is because she's also a professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago. She is a member of the Editorial Freelancers Association, but she is also an editor for the American Medical Writers Association, called AMWA, and is also a card-carrying member of the Chicago Women in Philanthropy group, because she's based out of Chicago, obviously. And so you have this person, Dr. O'Donnell, who is, a PhD. She has her PhD. She's a professor, working full time with a family, also doing editing on the side. And despite all that, she was still cool enough to not only respond and to do the interview, but to be very courteous about it. I've told her, I've thanked her a lot, obviously, in the interview process and afterwards. I want to state that publicly, that it was awesome that she was willing to help me when so many other people were just turning their noses at me, basically. Because I never once heard a response from the other 8 people on there. But I did get a second response, as I said, from a guy by the name of Andrew Doty, who is also a member of the EFA. And he has his own editing company called Edit Right, which is a business that works with self-published authors. Basically, the way to explain it is that it's a publishing company specifically for self-publishers, which sounds kind of contradictory, but basically what he does is like a normal publisher will see your manuscript, they'll like it, they'll work out a deal with you, pay you up front or give you an advance or do whatever. And then what they'll do is they will take your work and they will market it, they will publish it, get your ISBN, do basically everything that isn't writing, they'll do that. And in exchange, they take, a certain cut. It's apparently pretty big from what I hear. Andrew Doty basically does that, but he does not take a cut. Um, and what he does is he'll refer to people to other freelancers, because he doesn't do, like, he's not a graphic designer. So if he meets a self-published author that needs a graphic designer, he'll be like, okay, I know this guy who's probably willing to work with you. He does good work, and you can do this and that and this and that. So he's kind of the median for all that. And he's also the vice president of the St. Louis Publishers Association, which I guess is an association of publishers. What else can you say? But again, like Dr. O'Donnell, so grateful for their support. He also was very courteous, very nice, not trying to be snotty, not impatient, just willing to work with me. I can't say enough about these people. They're so glad that I was able to get a response. But I brought up Dr. O'Donnell and a little bit of her personal life, just to kind of call out people that like might think they're too busy. It's like, you're not that busy, because you've got this professor who's working full time. She's got a family with a young kid that she's taking care of, and she's doing editorial work, and she still finds time to do an interview and to be nice about it. So like, you don't have an excuse if you're like that. So that's, I guess that's me being a little petty, but it does bother me not getting a response, especially when when I'm on my deadline and my grade depends on it. But anyways, I'm not here to complain, or at least try not to, any more than I have to. But I do have the paper that I wrote. So I figured I would just read that, because it kind of gives, it summarizes some of the insights that I got. And as well as the interviews, because normally what happens, the example paper the professor gave us for the class for these interviews was that basically you just transcribe the interview and then that's your paper. I couldn't really do that, because I had, first of all, I had two different people that I was interviewing, and second of all, I had some broad topic questions, but most of it was following up and trying to get an idea of exactly what their perspective was on editing and writing and all this sort of thing. So I'm just going to read this paper. So I'll just start with that right now after that long preamble. Some of this is going to be a little redundant, because I've explained stuff that's already in the paper. But before I do that, actually, I'm going to time this, because this, according to Microsoft Word, this paper is 2,000 words, 2,187 to be exact. I'm going to time this and see how long it takes me to read 2,000 words. Okay, here we go. Last year, I decided that I wanted out of my dead-end job. Of all the options available, what made the most sense was to pursue a career in everything my job lacked. More than anything, what I wanted from my work was satisfaction. And out of all the things that seemed the most satisfying, it was getting back into my writing that made the most sense. But there had to be something more, something to further sustain me beyond the long and dubious path which awaited. After all, an English degree can be useful, but it is not universal. After some consideration, I fixated upon the idea of editing as a job to help substantiate my income. But where was I to find an editor? To my knowledge, I had never met one, or for that matter, met anybody who had experience in editing or its mother field of publishing, except that I had previously met an author at the Salt Lake City Comic-Con. No, he was not an editor, and he was self-published, meaning that he was not currently, quote-unquote, in on whatever circuit or clique existed for such field. But perhaps that was better, as he could potentially provide a unique insight to someone who, like me, was on the outside looking in. Alas, it was not meant to be. Though I sent him an email to ask for his help, I received no reply. Not wanting to waste any more time than necessary, I made a quick Google search for publishers in Utah that fit my desired criteria. That is to say, a publishing house that focuses on genre fiction, but found only one within driving distance for a potential face-to-face interview. Again, an email was sent, which, like the first, explained my situation cordially and again was met only with silence. Panicking as the deadline neared, I searched for more options. In time, I found listings on the Editorial Freelancers Association, which displayed a host of editors willing and waiting for some form of work pertaining to my career aspirations. In desperation, I forewent my usual procedure of sending emails one at a time and asking for face-to-face interview in favor of sending out multiple emails at once asking for a simple phone interview. I sent emails to 10 listed editors who seemed to possess some chance of response. Then at long last, I received a response. 2, in fact. I had no time to be picky, so rather than simply settling for one, I opted to interview both regardless of their status and would consolidate their answers. But I was lucky. Rather than being stuck with 2 stragglers in the industry, I instead found Molly O'Donnell, PhD, and Andrew Doty, Vice President of the St. Louis Publishers Association. I scheduled their interviews and prepared some basic questions, then readied myself for the new perspectives I would get into my dream career. The first order of business was to get to know the people being interviewed. Mr. Andrew Doty was based out of St. Louis, Missouri, running his own creative agency called EditRight for 6 years at the time. This business works similar to a publishing house in that it helps people get their work edited and published, as well as form connections to other auxiliary aspects of the business, such as graphic designers that can help design book covers. The key difference between EditRight and other publishers is that the latter does much more of the heavy lifting in exchange for a substantial cut of the profits, whereas EditRight is freelance, doing its work by way of commissioned and networking for those intending to self-publish. He also volunteers as the vice president of the St. Louis Publishers Association, overseeing its coteries. He earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree in English at Southern Illinois University. Dr. Molly O'Donnell grew up in Colorado, but received her philosophical doctorate from the University of Chicago, where she now teaches philosophy and environmental ethics. In her spare time, however, she edits as a member of the EFA, as well as being an editor for the American Medical Writers Association, or AMWA, and is a card-carrying member of the Chicago Women in Philanthropy Group. One quick note, a little bit on this. I don't think I went exactly into detail on payment. No, you know what? I lied. I'm sorry. I actually did. So I was going to go off on a little tangent about that, but I think I'll just wait and read that section of the paper. Okay, continuing on. What these two people have in common beyond their freelance editing work is that they both feel passionate regarding their work, not only as editors, but writers as well, and have felt this passion from early on in their lives. While their school degrees differ, both exhibited and spoke directly to say that they had passion for the work. They possessed certain skills which made them more inclined to the work, such as enjoyment in reading and parsing, assessing writing, analysis of subtext and implication. As such, for somebody to enjoy the work as an editor would require a certain leniency towards what the work entails. If one does not enjoy reading or analysis or providing a summary of changes, one will simply not enjoy the work. Mr. Doty made a point also that he got his start with a lot of volunteer work. He volunteered his efforts for friends and students, spending approximately 2 to 3 hours a day copy editing, which is the most basic form of editing, without pay for the sake of his own practice, but also to expand his network. Even having run his business for 6 years, he states that by far the bulk of awareness for his work, and therefore his paycheck, comes from word of mouth. Dr. O'Donnell, being a professor, does editing on the side, and therefore worries less about her reputation. If one were to have a career outside of editing, their presence in the marketplace would be secondary and thus less important. On the topic of schooling, both persons reinstated the importance of a college degree pertaining to the work. While English degrees may have a reputation for being worthless, neither hesitated in saying that it was a proper choice for an editing career, that it would certainly give one leverage in the job market, something that is needed regardless of the field of work, but rings doubly true for editing, which, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, has a projected change in employment around negative 1%, as opposed to the normal total of 7%. Both Dr. O'Donnell and Mr. Doty agreed that beyond having a degree, the wisest course of action is to join organizations dedicated to writing, publishing, editing, publishing, et al. Both agreed that joining the EFA was good for prospective work. Dr. O'Donnell also recommended the Association of Copy Editors, which offers discount memberships for students hoping to get into the work field. Mr. Doty recommended doing volunteer editing sporadically, but both interviewees also recommended working and or interning for publishers. The question of payment is somewhat uncertain for editors, not simply for the sometimes fickle nature of prospects, but also given that freelance editors such as those interviewed vary their prices from work to work. Dr. O'Donnell stated that work for AMWA nets one a salary in the region of anywhere between $70,000 and $140,000 a year. However, with such costs comes greater expectation and scrutiny, as one must not only understand the medicinal texts, but must understand them enough to analyze them and possess further schooling beyond the general recommendation of a bachelor's degree. With so much schooling, one could also come to teach a subject as a professor, but based on Dr. O'Donnell's given numbers, this seems to carry a greater risk. Her estimates for professors and their salaries range from as little as $12,000 to as much as $300,000. Fiction editing by itself was estimated by her range to be from $50,000 to $70,000 if one worked at it full time. As far as her personal rate for editing, there was trouble in giving a precise estimation as it was dependent. That should be dependent, but it's depended upon whatever work she was doing. She gave a baseline rate of $40 an hour, stating that $35 to $40 an hour is the lowest that a freelance editor would reasonably charge. As previously implied, the time spent on any manuscript or other work varies between each job. Mr. Doty in his work is more specialized, given that EditWrite does more than simple copy editing, having a greater involvement and knowledge of the business aspect of editing and publishing. For Mr. Doty, he charged $60 an hour for anything with which he possesses expertise, but charges more for anything which he lacks familiarity in order to compensate for his necessary work. As his work as vice president of the SLPA is volunteer, lining up with his ethos, if not his wallet. Working full-time at this rate for a full year could potentially net someone a salary, quote unquote, in the neighborhood of $125,000. Unfortunately, this is a high estimate, as the stream of job prospects is not always constant and therefore remains ever uncertain. In addition, Mr. Doty stated that he will be flexible in his pricing if he feels that his work, that is to say, the work of those whom he helps, is noble in its cause, such as a certain client mentioned who had published an autobiography of her personal turmoil as a means of inspiration. In addition, his business, EditWrite, requires more than expertise as an editor, also requiring know-how for running a small business. What this all amounts to is that more involvement warrants greater pay, whether that seems more schooling or more expertise. The greater payout comes from the greater input, though. As is common in life, there is always risk and uncertainty. To conclude, each person interviewed was asked about regrets they might have in retrospect, as well as any further or culminated advice to anyone hoping to get into editing as a career. Neither seemed to have any particular regrets to share. Indeed, both struggled with this aspect of the interview more than any other. Dr. O'Donnell eventually stated regret over making assumptions about books instead of reading them for herself and deciding her own opinion. She wished that she had perhaps read more, not merely as a hobby, but as a furthering of her perception and general philosophy. Mr. Doty was even more reticent, at first stating that he simply had no regrets or retrospective correction. He did, however, manage to state that he wished perhaps he had worked harder, that he would have been more focused, that he wanted to be a faster reader than he was. In the end, the advice from both was to work as much as possible, even as a volunteer or intern. Both stated that joining the EFA would be a wise decision. Dr. O'Donnell added on also ACES and a website called Submittable, where one can discover internships. She also made a direct statement that one should read not only philosophy books, but should read them in their entirety rather than simply abridgments or descriptions. Mr. Doty spoke of the importance of word of mouth for business and reputation. The interviews themselves went well. Blah, blah, blah. I was not in a rush. That's more, this part is more of an assessment of the interview, which is part of the paper rather than what I wanted to say. Just double checking to see if there's anything else that is worth mentioning. Okay, well, it's not exactly 200 words, but it took me about 10 minutes according to my stopwatch. I think that's about a fair estimate. So that's just a brief look into the sort of things that I learned about editing and publishing and whatnot. The thing about AMWA that Dr. O'Donnell mentioned really caught my attention. That editors for that particular publication make a minimum of 70 grand, which is insane. But of course, you're held to a much higher degree of scrutiny over that. It is tempting to think and be like, well, would it be worth going to school for that? But you know, to be honest, I actually really do like medical science, and it would be fascinating to learn more about it. But I don't think uh, I I'm not confident that I would be able to get a degree in it, because that is a lot more work than I'm currently doing. I am a little curious as to whether it would be an MD or maybe just a PhD, or like if it would honestly be easier to do editing, because you wouldn't like you could get your medical degree and you wouldn't necessarily have to be a medical intern, like a lot of because yeah. Kimry says my timer was off because of my pauses and skipping. It is a little off because of the skipping, but I did pause it when I went on my little tangent. In 10 minutes, it's just a general estimation anyway. Tyler's mentioning that, yeah, it is like 10 years of work, which is true. At my current job, when I first started, I worked with this girl who was like 17, going on 18, about to graduate high school. And I was talking to her. I was like, so, what do you want to do with your life? She's like, oh, I actually want to be an anesthesiologist. I was like, oh, no kidding. That's cool. How long is that going to take you? She said, well, between schooling and med school and then the actual, um, I can't remember what they call it, residency, internship. Basically, like you don't just become a doctor right out of school. You have to stick around a place for a little while. So she said between all that, it was like 12 years between actually graduating high school, or no, sorry, 12 years from uh, the beginning of like medical school or beginning of like college and uh, actually becoming an anesthesiologist. Of course, I work with a different girl now who's a little younger than that other girl was, um, who really she's like she's planning on being a scientist and she's really smart. Um, she mentioned that she's basically like already got her associates, I think, even though she's still like 15, 16. She's done like uh, a lot for college education in high school. A, because she's bored, and B, just because to get a head start on it. So that's kind of neat. But for me, I don't know if it's really worth it taking the risk to go to medical school and try and figure that out. As much as fascinating as medical science is, A, I'm not good at science, and B, I my memory is not a very precise thing, but it needs to be when you're a doctor. You need, especially going through medical school, you need to know the names of things and understand how they work. You can't just approximate it or BS your way through it. And if you did, you'd put people at risk. Kimmery is saying that I only work with gay guys. No, actually, there are a lot of gay people where I work for some reason. But I noticed the other day, aside from my bosses, I was the only guy working. So that was like four ladies, four or five. But unfortunately, that's not as exciting as it sounds. Or maybe if you work with women, you realize that that would never be exciting. But no, they're all right. I shouldn't badmouth them. They're decent people. I mean, they do work in kitchens, but so am I, so I'm not going to judge them on that aspect. Anyways, so that was a little bit of editing, and from an inside perspective, that's it's a little unusual. I don't think I've read any of my school assignments up to this point. I had to basically I crammed that. What a way to end a sentence. No, I wrote that interview last minute, or I wrote the paper last minute because I was falling behind, and I don't have time to do it Fridays and Saturdays, and on Sundays I don't like to do homework. for religious reasons in part, but also because it's like the only day I get off, like that I just have to do nothing. So part of me is like, I need to rest as much as I can. But I basically had to do that last minute. And looking over it, I saw a couple things. I'm like, dang it, that should have been better. Especially like if you're writing a paper about wanting to correct other people's writing, you should probably be sure to, make sure that yours isn't suck. Um, people, Kimmery, of course, is suggesting more fairy tales. Um, it is tempting because I'm still a little bit out of it. Shelby's asking me if I managed to get a Sunday nap. I did, actually. I ended up, after lunch, I ended up napping for like 3 or 4 hours, which was nice, but I'm not sure it was enough. So that was fun. Uh, Let me think. I have an entire thing for this stream. Uh, Let me check something real quick because I had something saved to my pocket, and it was. Let me think. It was like a list of like free stories. I don't think they were just short stories. I think they might have been like free books. So I was thinking about looking over them. They might be a little too much reading to do at once. I did forget. Uh, I do have another one, an article saved from Psychology Today. It's titled "Why I Left Academia to Write Fantasy Books." I guess if I run out of stuff, I could try reading that. Yes, okay. So I have a list of books that are completely free from a website. I'm going to look over those real quick. This is from lindsayburoker.com. Lindsay, Lindsay, and Buroker, Buroker. There's some of these books are just apparently completely free, which could go either way, honestly. The one thing I dislike is that so many so much genre fiction is so long that you're like, do I really want to read this? Do I have time, especially for a stream like this? I think I might, however, read some of those other short stories I mentioned. Good Man is Hard to Find and Most Dangerous Game. See what they're all about. Hopefully, Good Man is Hard to Find is not as gay as it sounds, but I guess we'll see. I think I might actually take a moment and take my little break now and then come back and start that reading. Kimmery's asking me if I'm going to read And Then There Were None, 10 Little Indians. I'm trying to think. 10 Little Indians is just like a nursery rhyme itself. So I don't know how much good that would do because it'd be like, 2 minutes of reading. As far as And Then There Were None, I don't know. Because because that kind of goes back to like this idea. I might end up resorting to it where I just read a book through and through and just do like one chapter a week or something. Kagan is saying they prefer to be called Native Americans. That's true, although I think the original title of the book was 10 Little N-Words. N-Words, that is, and I'm not sure. I don't think that's better, personally, but in any case, I'll let you guys decide whether you like to say the N-word a lot or whether you prefer to just refer to people as Indians more. In the meantime, however, I'm going to take my break. I know I sound like I have a cold. I promise I don't. I'm going to try and clear my throat. Yeah, that wasn't funny. I probably shouldn't have laughed. I'm going to take my break. So, don't go dying on me. I'll be back in approximately 5 minutes. The song is going to loop through twice. Stay tuned. Or don't. I'm not your dad. That that abrupt silence, man, it gets me every time. Okay, I'm back. I'm still alive. Believe it or not. So I was thinking about reading uh, either A Good Man is Hard to Find or The Most Dangerous Game. Looking at A Good Man is Hard to Find, however, it is, according to this, it is about 6,500 words, which by my estimate would mean about 35 minutes of reading ish, which isn't terrible, but that is a long, that is quite the read. And then the other one was The Most Dangerous Game, which I would like to measure right now, if you'll give me a moment. And oh, that's even longer. That's 8,000 words. Okay. So, Shelby is saying that she wants me to read Good Man is Hard to Find. Any other yay or nays? Because it will be a long read, but I'll read it if that's what people want. I don't know anything about it. I don't know what happens. As far as I'm concerned, it might as well be, just about anything. But Tyler says he has no opinion. Kimmery's making puns. Kagan might. Kagan's probably not even going to be around. Well, I suppose. I suppose it's probably. I mean, what else are we going to do? Okay, I'm just going to read it. And if you don't like it, sorry. I don't know anything about this. Hopefully, it's not super inappropriate. And hopefully, I don't find that out when it's like 10, 20 minutes in. I suppose one of these days I might actually get around to reading a story on this that is longer than one night. The only problem I have with that is I don't want people to get bored of it, because we did do manga in theory and practice, which is all well and good, but people were getting bored of it, and I don't want that to happen. Even though I intended for this thing to be a boring stream to begin with anyway. Now there's a precedent that it has to be a lot more exciting. So that's what we're going to try and do. Anyways, but enough complaining. This is A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. I don't know anything about this, but apparently it is commonly featured in schools and intro to literature classes. So we're going to start. The grandmother didn't want to go to Florida. She wanted to visit some of her connections in East Tennessee, and she was seizing at every chance to change Bailey's mind. Bailey was the son she lived with, her only boy. He was sitting on the edge of his chair at the table, bent over the orange sports section of the journal. Now look here, Bailey, she said. See here, read this. And she stood with one hand on her thin hip and the other rattling the newspaper at his bald head. Here this fellow that calls himself the Misfit is loose from the federal pen and headed toward Florida. And you read here what it says he did to these people? Just you read it. I wouldn't take my children in any direction with a criminal like that loose in it. I couldn't answer to my conscience if I did. Bailey didn't look up from his reading, so she wheeled around then and faced the children's mother, a young woman in slacks, whose face was as broad and innocent as a cabbage, and was tied around with a green headkerchief. Is that really what people say, headkerchief? Whatever. A green headkerchief that had 2 points on the top like rabbit's ears. She was sitting on the sofa, feeding the baby his apricots out of a jar. "The children have been to Florida before," said the old lady. "You all ought to take them somewhere else for a change, so they would see different parts of the world and be broad. They never have been to East Tennessee." The children's mother didn't seem to hear her, but the 8-year-old boy, John Wesley, a stocky child with glasses, said, "If you want to go to Florida, why don't you stay at home?" He and the little girl, June Starr, were reading the funny papers on the floor. "She wouldn't stay home to be a queen for a day," June Starr said without raising her yellow head. "Yes, and what would you do if this fellow the misfit caught you?" the grandmother asked. "I'd smack his face," John Wesley said. "She wouldn't stay at home for $1,000,000, June Starr said. "Afraid she'd miss something. She has to go everywhere we go." "All right, miss," the grandmother said. "Just remember that the next time you want me to curl your hair." June Starr said her hair was naturally curly. The next morning, the grandmother was the first one in the car, ready to go. She had her big valise that looked like the head of a hippopotamus in one corner, and underneath it she was hiding a basket with Pitty Sing, the cat. Pitty Sing? Why would you name your cat? Whatever. She was hiding a basket with Pitty Sing, the cat, in it. She didn't intend for the cat to be left alone in the house for 3 days because he would miss her too much, and she was afraid he might brush against one of the gas burners and accidentally asphyxiate himself. Her son, Bailey, didn't like to arrive at a motel with a cat. This is kind of awkwardly written. Doesn't sound like it's meant to be read aloud. Or maybe I'm just not good at speaking. I don't know. Either way, here we go. She sat in the middle of the back seat with John Wesley and June Starr on either side of her. Bailey and the children's mother and the baby sat in front, and they left Atlanta at 8:45 with the mileage on the car at 55,890. That's really specific. The grandmother wrote this down because she thought it would be interesting to say how many miles they had been when they got back. It took them 20 minutes to reach the outskirts of the city. The old lady settled herself comfortably, removing her white cotton gloves and putting them up with her purse on the shelf in the front of the back window. The children's mother still had on slacks, and still had her head tied up in a green kerchief, but the grandmother had a navy blue straw sailor hat with a bunch of white violets on the brim, and a navy blue dress with a small white dot in the print. Her collars and cuffs were a white organdy trimmed with lace, and at her neckline she had pinned a purple spray of cloth violets containing a sachet. In case of an accident, anyone seeing her dead on the highway would know at once she was a lady. She said she thought it was going to be a good day for driving, neither too hot nor too cold, and she cautioned Bailey that the speed limit was 55 miles an hour and that the patrolmen hid themselves behind billboards and small clumps of trees and sped out after you before you had a chance to slow down. She pointed out interesting details of the scenery. Stone Mountain, the blue granite that in some places came up to both sides of the highway, the brilliant red clay banks slightly streaked with purple, and the various crops that made rows of green lacework on the ground. The trees were full of silver white sunlight, and the meanest of them sparkled. The children were reading comic magazines, and their mother had gone back to sleep. "Let's go through Georgia fast, so we won't have to look at it much," John Wesley said. "If I were a little boy," said the grandmother, "I wouldn't talk about my native state that way. Tennessee has the mountains, and Georgia has the hills." "Tennessee is just a hillbilly dumping ground," John Wesley said, "and Georgia is a lousy state, too." "You said it," June Starr said. "In my time," said the grandmother, folding her thin, veined fingers, "children were more respectful of their native states and their parents and everything else. People did right then. Oh, look at this cute little pickaninny," she said, and pointed to a Negro child standing in the door of a shack. "Wouldn't that make a picture now?" she asked, and they all turned and looked at the little Negro out of the back window. He waved. "He didn't have any breeches on," June Starr said. "He probably didn't have any," grandmother explained. "Little N-words in the country don't have things like we do. If I could paint, I'd paint that picture," she said. The children exchanged comic books. The grandmother offered to hold the baby, and the children's mother passed him over the front seat to her. She set him on her knee and bounced him and told him about the things they were passing. She rolled her eyes and screwed up her mouth and stuck her leathery, thin face into his smooth, bland one. Occasionally he gave her a faraway smile. They passed a large cotton field with 5 or 6 graves fenced in the middle of it, like a small island. "Look at that graveyard," grandmother said, pointing it out. "That was the old family burying ground. That belonged to the plantation. Where's the plantation? John Wesley asked. Gone was the wind, said the grandmother. Ha ha! When the children finished all the comic books they had brought, they opened the lunch and ate it. The grandmother ate a peanut butter sandwich with an olive and would not let the children throw the box and paper napkins out the window. There was nothing else to do. When there was nothing else to do, they played a game by choosing a cloud and making the other two guess what shape it suggested. John Wesley took the shape of a cow, and June Star guessed a cow, and John Wesley said no, an automobile, and June Star said he didn't play fair, and they began to slap each other over the grandmother. The grandmother said she would tell them a story if they would keep quiet. When she told the story, she rolled her eyes and waved her head and was very dramatic. She said at once, when she was a maiden lady, she had been courted by Mr. Edgar Atkins Teagarden from Jasper, Georgia. She said he was a very good-looking man and a gentleman, and that he brought her a watermelon every Sunday afternoon with his initials cut into it, E.A.T. Well, one Saturday, she said Mr. Teagarden brought the watermelon, and there was nobody at home, and he left it out on the front porch and returned to his buggy it to Jasper. But she never got the watermelon, she said. Jeez, because an N-word boy ate it when he saw the initials E.A.T. The story tickled John Wesley's funny bone, and he giggled and giggled, but June Star didn't think it was any good. She said she wouldn't marry a man that just brought her a watermelon on Saturday. The grandmother said she would have done well to marry Mr. Teagarden because he was a gentleman and had bought Coca-Cola stock when it first came out, and that he had died only a few years ago, a very wealthy man. They stopped at the tower for barbecued sandwiches. The tower was a part stucco, part wood filling station, and dance hall set in a clearing outside of Timothy. A fat man named Red Sammy Butts ran it, and there were signs stuck here and there on the building and for miles up and down the highway saying, "Try Red Sammy's famous barbecue. None like famous Red Sammy's. Red Sam, the fat boy with the happy laugh, a veteran. Red Sammy's your man." You guys are going to be just absolutely bamboozled when that somehow comes back and turns out to be a pivotal moment in the plot. Also, I don't know why, but like this story and the story from last week, and also the book Kimmery's been suggesting, every last one of these, like the N-word is just freaking everywhere, and I promise I'm not choosing that. I'm not doing that on purpose. I can't get away from it. So it must be because I'm white. Anyways, Red Sammy was laying on the bare ground outside of the tower with his head under a truck while a gray monkey about a foot high chained to a small chinaberry tree chattered nearby. The monkey sprang back into the tree and got on the highest limb as soon as he saw the children jump out of the car and run towards him. Inside the tower was a long dark room with a counter at one end and tables at the other and dancing space in the middle. They all sat down at the board table next to the Nickelodeon, and Red Sam's wife, a tall, burnt brown woman with hair and eyes lighter than her skin, came and took their order. The children's mother put a dime in the machine and played the Tennessee Waltz, and the grandmother said that the tune always made her want to dance. She asked Bailey if he would like to dance, but he only glared at her. He didn't have a naturally sunny disposition like she did, and trips made him nervous. Grandmother's brown eyes were very bright. She swayed her head from side to side and pretended she was dancing in her chair. June Star said play something she could tap to, so the children's mother put in another dime and played a fast number, and June Star stepped out onto the dance floor and did her tap routine. "Ain't she cute?" Red Sam's wife said, leaning over the counter. "Would you like to come be my little girl?" "No, I certainly wouldn't," June Star said. "I wouldn't like to live in a broken-down place like this for $1,000,000, she said. She ran back to the table. "Ain't she cute?" the woman repeated, stretching her mouth politely. "Aren't you ashamed?" hissed the grandmother. Red Sam came in and told his wife to quit lounging on the counter and hurry up with these people's orders. His khaki trousers reached just to his hip bones, and his stomach hung over them like a sack of meal swaying under his shirt. He came over and sat down at a table nearby and let out a combination sigh and yodel. "You can't win," he said. "You can't win." And he wiped his sweating red face off with a gray handkerchief. "These days you don't know who to trust," he said. "Ain't that the truth?" "People are certainly not nice like they used to be," said the grandmother. "Two fellers come in here last week," Red Sammy said, "driving a Chrysler. It was an old beat-up car, but it was a good one, and these boys looked all right to me. Said they worked at the mill, and you know I let them fellers charge the gas they brought? Now why would I do that? Because you're a good man, the grandmother said at once. Yes'm, suppose I am, Red Sam said, as if he were struck with this answer. His wife brought the orders, carrying the 5 plates all at once without a tray, 2 in each hand and 1 balanced on her arm. If it isn't a soul in this green world of God's that you can trust, and I don't count nobody out of that, not nobody, she said, looking at Red Sammy. Did you read about that criminal, the misfit that's escaped? Asked the grandmother. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he didn't track this place right here, said the woman. If he hears about it being here, I wouldn't be none surprised to see him. If he hears it's 2 cents at the cash in the cash register, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he. That'll do, Red Sam said. Get these people their Coca-Colas. And the woman went off to get the rest of the order. A good man is hard to find, Red Sammy said. Oh, that's the name of the story. Yeah, we did it. Everything is getting terrible. I remember the day you could go off and leave your screen door unlatched. Not no more. He and the grandmother discussed better times. The old lady said that, in her opinion, urine was entirely to blame for the way things were now. She said the way Europe acted, you would think we were made of money, and Red Sam said it was no use talking about it. She was exactly right. The children ran outside into the white sunlight and looked at the monkey in the lacy chinaberry tree. He was busy catching fleas on himself and biting each one carefully between his teeth as if it were a delicacy. They drove off again into the hot afternoon. The grandmother took cat naps and woke up every few minutes with her own snoring. Outside at Toomsboro, she woke up and recalled an old plantation she had visited in this neighborhood once when she was a young lady. She said the house had 6 white columns across the front, and there was an avenue of oaks leading up to it, and 2 little wooden trellis arbors on either side in front where you sat down with your suitor after a stroll in the garden. She recalled exactly which road to turn off or to get to it. She knew that Bailey would not be willing to lose any time looking at an old house, but the more she talked about it, the more she wanted to see it once again, and find out if the little twin arbors were still standing. There was a secret panel in this house, she said craftily, not telling the truth but wishing that she were, and the story went that all the family silver was hidden in it when Sherman came through, but it was never found. Hey, John Wesley said, let's go see it. We'll find it. We'll poke all the woodwork and find it. Who lives there? Where do you turn off at? Hey, Pop, can we turn off there? We never have seen a house with a secret panel. We never have seen a house with a secret panel, June Star shrieked. Let's go to the house with the secret panel. Hey, Pop, can we go see the house with the secret panel? It's not far from here, I know, the grandmother said. It wouldn't take over 20 minutes. Bailey was looking straight ahead. His jaw was rigid as a horseshoe. No, he said. He is my spirit animal. The children began to yell and scream. They wanted to see the house with the secret panel. John Wesley kicked the back of the front seat. June Star hung over her mother's shoulder and whined desperately into her ear that they had never had any fun, even on vacation. They could never do what they wanted to do. The baby began to scream, and John Wesley kicked the back of the seat so hard that his father could feel the blows in his kidney. All right, he shouted and drew the car to a stop on the side of the road. Will you all shut up? Will you all just shut up for 1 second? If you don't shut up, we won't go anywhere. Will be very educational for them, the grandmother murmured. All right, Bailey said, but get this. This is the only time we're going to stop for anything like this. This is the one and only time. The dirt road you have to turn down is about a mile back, the grandmother directed. I marked it when we passed. A dirt road, Bailey groaned. After they had turned around and were headed down toward the dirt road, the grandmother recalled other points about the house, the beautiful glass over the front door and the candle lamp in the hall. John Wesley said that the secret panel was probably in the fireplace. You can't go inside this house, Bailey said. You don't know who lives there. While you all talk to the people in front, I'll run around behind and get in a window, John Wesley suggested. We'll all stay in the car, his mother said. They turned onto the dirt road and the car raced roughly along in a swirl of pink dust. The grandmother recalled the times when there were no paved roads, and 30 miles was a day's journey. The dirt road was hilly, and there were sudden washes in it, sharp curves on dangerous embankments. All at once they would be on a hill, looking down over the blue tops of trees for miles around. Then the next minute they would be in a red depression with the dust-coated trees looking down at them. This place better turn up in a minute, Bailey said, or I'm going to turn around. The road looked as if no one had traveled on it for months. It's not much further, the grandmother said. just as she said it, a horrible thought came to her. The thought was so embarrassing she turned red in the face, and her eyes dilated and her feet jumped up, upsetting her valise in the corner. The instant the valise moved, the newspaper top she had over the blanket under it rose with a snarl, and Pitty Singh, the cat, sprang onto Bailey's shoulder. The children were thrown to the floor, and their mother, clutching the baby, was thrown out the door onto the ground. The old lady was thrown into the front seat. The car turned over once and landed right side up in a gulch off the side of the road. Bailey remained in the driver's seat with the cat, gray straight with a broad white face and an orange nose clinging to his neck like a caterpillar. As soon as the children saw they could move their arms and legs, they scrambled out of the car shouting, "We've had an accident!" Like people do. The grandmother was curled up under the dashboard, hoping she was injured so the Bailey's wrath would not come down on her all at once. The horrible thought she had before the accident was that the house she had remembered so vividly was not in Georgia, but in Tennessee. Bailey removed the cat from his neck and with both hands and flung it out the window against the side of a pine tree. Then he got out of the car and started looking for her children's mother. She was sitting against the side of the red-gutted ditch, holding the screaming baby, but she only had a cut down her face and a broken shoulder. "We've had an accident!" the children screamed in a frenzy of delight. "But nobody's killed," June Star said with disappointment. Wow. As the grandmother limped out of the car, her hat still pinned to her head, but the broken front brim standing up at a jaunty angle and the violet spray hanging off the side. They all sat down in the ditch, except the children, to recover from the shock. They were all shaking. "Maybe a car will come along," said the children's mother hoarsely. "I believe I have injured an organ," said the grandmother, pressing her side, but no one answered her. Bailey's teeth were clattering. He had on a yellow sports shirt with bright blue parrots designed in it, and his face was as yellow as the shirt. The grandmother decided she would not mention that the house is in Tennessee. The road was about 10 feet above, and they could see only the tops of the trees on the other side of it. Behind the ditch they were sitting, and there were more woods, tall and dark and deep. In a few minutes they saw a car some distance away on the top of a hill, coming slowly as if the occupants were watching them. The grandmother stood up and waved both arms dramatically to attract their attention. The car continued to come on slowly, disappeared around a bend, and appeared again, moving even slower, on top of the hill they had gone over. It was a big, black, battered, hearse-like automobile. There were 3 men in it. It came to a stop just over them for some minutes. The driver looked down with a steady, expressionless gaze to where they were sitting and didn't speak. Then he turned his head and muttered something to the other two, and they got out. One was a fat boy in black trousers and red sweatshirt with a silver stallion embossed on the front of it. He moved around on the right side of them and stood staring, his mouth partly open in a kind of loose grin. The other had on khaki pants and a blue striped coat and a gray hat pulled down very low, hiding most of his face. He came around slowly on the left side. Neither spoke. The driver got out of the car and stood by the side of it, looking down at him. He was an older man than the other two. His hair was just beginning to gray, and he wore silver-rimmed spectacles that gave him a scholarly look. He had a long, creased face and didn't have on any shirt or undershirt. He had on blue jeans that were too tight for him and was holding a black hat and a gun. The 2 boys also had guns. "We've had an accident!" the children screamed. The grandmother had the peculiar feeling that the bespectacled man was someone she knew. His face was familiar to her, as if she had known him all her life, but she could not recall who he was. He moved away from the car and began to come down the embankment, placing his feet carefully so that he wouldn't slip. He had on tan and white shoes and no socks, and his ankles were red and thin. "Good afternoon," he said. "I see you all had a little spill." "We turned over twice," said the grandmother. "Once," he corrected. "We seen it happen. Try their car and see will it run, Hiram," he said quietly to the boy with the gray hat. "What you got that gun for?" John Wesley asked. "What you gonna do with that gun?" "Lady," the man said to the children's mother, "would you mind calling them children to sit down by you? Children make me nervous. I want all of you to sit down right together there where you're at." "What are you telling us to do that for?" June Star asked. Behind them the line of woods gaped like a dark open mouth. "Come here," said their mother. "Look here now," Bailey began suddenly. "We're in a predicament. The grandmother shrieked. She scrambled to her feet and stood staring. "You're the misfit! I recognized you at once!" "Yes'm," the man said, smiling slightly as if he were pleased in spite of himself to be known. "But it would have been better for all of you, lady, if you hadn't recognized me." Bailey turned his head sharply and said something to his mother that shocked even the children. The old lady began to cry, and the misfit reddened. "Lady," he said, "don't you get upset. Sometimes a man says things he don't mean. I don't reckon he meant to talk to you that way." "You wouldn't shoot a lady, now would you?" the grandmother said, and removed a clean handkerchief from her cuff and began to slap at her eyes with it. Like, slap? Like, just pound her face with it? Whatever. The misfit pointed the toe of his shoe into the ground and made a little hole and then covered it up again. "I would hate to have to." "Listen," the grandmother almost screamed. "I know you're a good man. You don't look a bit like you have common blood. I know you must come from nice people." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Finest people in all the world." When he smiled, he showed a row of strong white teeth. "God never made a finer woman than my mother, and my daddy's heart was pure gold," he said. The boy with the red sweatshirt had come around behind him and was standing with his gun at his hip. The misfit squatted down on the ground. "Watch them children, Bobby Lee," he said. "You know they make me nervous." He looked at the 6 of them huddled together in front of him, and he seemed to be embarrassed, as if he couldn't think of anything to say. "Ain't a cloud in the sky," he remarked. "Don't see no sun, but don't see no cloud neither." "Yes, it's a beautiful day," said the grandmother. "Listen, you shouldn't call yourself the misfit, because I know you're a good man at heart. I can just look at you and tell." "Hush!" Bailey yelled. "Hush! Everyone shut up and let me handle this." He was squatting in the position of a runner about to sprint forward, but he didn't move. "I appreciate that, lady," the misfit said, and drew a little circle in the ground with the butt of his gun. "It'll take a half-hour to fix this here car," Hiram called, looking over the raised hood of it. "Well, first you and Bobby Lee get him and that little boy to step over yonder with you," Misfit said, pointing to Bailey and John Wesley. "The boys want to ask you something," he said to Bailey. "Would you mind stepping back in them woods there with them? "Listen," Bailey began. We're in a terrible predicament. Nobody realizes what this is," and his voice cracked. His eyes were as blue and intense as the parrots in his shirt, and he remained perfectly still. The grandmother reached up to adjust her apron as if she were going to the woods with him, but it came off in her hand. She stood staring at it, and after a second she let it fall to the ground. Hiram pulled Bailey up by the arm as if he were assisting an old man. John Wesley caught hold of his father's hand, and Bobby Lee followed. They went off toward the wood, and just as they reached the dark edge, Bailey turned and supported himself against a gray, naked pine trunk. He shouted, "I'll be back in a minute, Mama. Wait on me." "Come back this instant," his mother shrilled, but they all disappeared into the woods. "Bailey, boy," the grandmother called in a tragic voice, but she found she was looking at the misfit, squatting on the ground in front of her. "I just know you're a good man," she said desperately. "You're not a bit common." "No, I ain't a good man," the misfit said after a second, as if he considered her statement carefully. "But I ain't the worst in the world neither. My daddy said I was a different breed of dog from my brothers and my sisters. You know, Daddy said, it's some that can live their whole life without asking about it, and it's others has to know why it is. And this boy is one of the latters. He is going to be into everything." He put on his black hat and looked up suddenly, and then deep into the woods as if he were embarrassed again. "I'm sorry I don't have a shirt on before you ladies," he said, hunching his shoulders slightly. "We buried our clothes that we had on when we escaped, and we're just making do until we can get better. We borrowed these from some folks we met." "That's perfectly all right," the grandmother said. "Maybe Bailey has an extra shirt in his suitcase." "I'll look and see directly," the misfit said. "Where are they taking him?" the children's mother screamed. "Daddy was a coward himself," the misfit said. "You couldn't put anything over on him. We never got in trouble with the authorities, though. Just had the knack of handling them." "You could be honest, too, if you'd only try," the grandmother said. "Think how wonderful it would be to settle down and live a comfortable life, and not have to think about somebody chasing you all the time." The misfit kept scratching in the ground with the butt of his gun as if he were thinking about it. "Yes'm, somebody is always after you," he murmured. The grandmother noticed how thin his shoulder blades were just behind his hat, because she was standing looking up down on him. "Do you ever pray?" she asked. He shook his head. All she saw was the black hat wiggle between his shoulder blades. "No," he said. There was a pistol shot from the woods, followed closely by another. Then silence. The old lady's head jerked around. She could hear the wind move through the treetops with a long, satisfied insuck of breath. "Aunt Bailey, boy," she called. "I was a gospel singer for a while," the misfit said. "I've been most everything. Been in the armed service, both land and sea, at home and abroad. Been I've been twict married, been an undertaker, been with the railroads, plowed Mother Earth, been in a tornado, seen a man burnt alive once. He looked up at the children's mother and the little girl who were sitting close together, their faces white and their eyes glassy. I even seen a woman flogged, he said. Pray, pray, the grandmother began. Pray, pray. I never was a bad boy that I remember of, the misfit said in an almost dreamy voice. But somewheres along the line I done something wrong and got sent to the penitentiary. I was buried alive, and he looked up and held her attention to him by a steady stare. That's when you should have started to pray, she said. What did you do to get sent to that penitentiary the first time? Turn to the right. It was a wall, the misfit said, looking up at the cloudless sky. Turn to the left. It was a wall. Look up at the ceiling. Look down. It was a floor. I forgot what I done, lady. I sat there trying to remember what it was I done, and I ain't recalled it to this day. Once in a while, I would think it was coming to me, but it never come. Maybe they put you in by mistake, the little lady said vaguely. No, ma'am, it wasn't no mistake. They had the papers on me. You must have stolen something, she said. Misfit sneered slightly. Nobody had nothing I wanted. It was a head doctor at the penitentiary said what I had done, and what I had done was kill my daddy, but I known that for a lie. My daddy died in 1919 of the epidemic flu, and I never had nothing to do with it. He was buried in the Mount Hopewell Baptist churchyard, and you can go there and see for yourself. If you would pray, the old lady said, Jesus would help you. That's right, the misfit said. Well, then why don't you pray? She asked, trembling with delight suddenly. I don't want no help, he said. I'm doing all right by myself. Bobby Lee and Hiram came ambling back from the woods. Bobby Lee was dragging a yellow shirt with bright blue parrots on it. Throw me that shirt, Bobby Lee. The shirt came flying at the misfit and landed on his shoulder, and he put it on. The grandmother couldn't name what the shirt reminded her of. No, lady, the misfit said while he was buttoning it up. I found that the crime don't matter. You can do one thing, and you can do another. Kill a man or take a tire off his car. Because sooner or later you're going to forget what it was you done and just be punished for it. Children's mother had begun to make heaving noises as if she couldn't get back her breath. Lady, he asked, would you and that little girl like to step off yonder with Bobby Lee and Hiram and join your husband? Why, yes, thank you, the mother said faintly. Her left arm dangled helplessly, and she was holding the baby, who had gone to sleep in the other. Help that lady up, Hiram, the misfit said as she struggled to climb out of the ditch. And Bobby Lee, you hold on to that little girl's hand. I don't want to hold hands with him, June Star said. He reminds me of a pig. Fat Boy blushed and laughed and caught her by the arm and pulled her off into the woods after Hiram and her mother. Alone with the misfits, the grandmother found that she had lost her voice. There was not a cloud in the sky nor any sun. There was nothing around her but woods. She wanted to tell him that he must pray. She opened and closed her mouth several times before anything came out. Finally, she found herself saying, Jesus, Jesus, meaning, Jesus help you. But the way she was saying it sounded as if she might be cursing. Yes'm, the misfit said as if he agreed. Jesus showing everything off balance. It was the same case with him as with me, except he hadn't committed any crime, and they could prove I had committed one, because they had the papers on me. Of course, they never shown me any papers. That's why I sign myself now. I said long ago, you get you a signature and sign everything you do and keep a copy of it. Then you'll know what you done, and you can hold up the crime to the punishment and see do they match, and in the end you'll have something to prove you ain't been treated right. I call myself the misfit because I can't make all I done wrong fit all I gone through in punishment. There was a piercing scream from the woods, followed quickly by a pistol report. Does it seem right to you, lady, that one is punished a heap and the other ain't punished at all? Jesus, the old lady cried, you've got good blood. I know you wouldn't shoot a lady. I know you come from nice people. Pray, Jesus, you ought not to shoot a lady. I'll give you all the money I've got. Lady, the misfit said, looking beyond her far into the woods, there never was a body that give the undertaker a tip. There were two more pistol reports, and the grandmother raised her head like a parched old turkey hen, crying for water, and called, Bailey boy, as if her heart would break. Jesus was the only one that ever raised the dead, the misfit continued, and he shouldn't have done it. He's shown everything off balance. If he did what he said, then it's nothing for you to do but throw away everything and follow him. And if he didn't, then it's nothing for you to do but enjoy the few minutes you got left the best way you can. by killing somebody, or burning down his house, or doing some other meanness to him. No pleasure but meanness, he said, and his voice had become almost a snarl. Maybe he didn't raise the dead, the old lady mumbled, not knowing what she was saying, but feeling so dizzy that she sank down in the ditch, with her legs twisted under her. I wasn't there, so I can't say he didn't, the misfit said. I wished I had have been there, he said, hitting the ground with his fist. It ain't right. I wasn't there because if I had been there, I would have known. Listen, lady, he said in a high voice. If I had been there, I would have known, and I wouldn't be like I am now. His voice seemed to crack, and the grandmother's head cleared for an instant. She saw the man's face twisted close to her own, as if he were going to cry, and she murmured, Why, you're one of my babies. You're one of my own children. She reached out and touched him on the shoulder. The misfit sprang back as if a snake had bitten him, and shot her 3 times through the chest. Then he put his gun down on the ground and took off his glasses and began to clean them. Hiram and Bobby Lee returned from the woods and stood over the ditch, looking down at the grandmother, who sat and half lay in a puddle of blood with her legs crossed under her like a child's, and her face smiling up at the cloudless sky. Without his glasses, the misfit's eyes were red-rimmed and pale and defenseless looking. Take her off and throw her where you've shown the others, he said, picking up the cat that was rubbing itself against his leg. She was a talker, wasn't she? Bobby Lee said, sliding down the ditch with a yodel. She would have been a good woman, the misfit said. If it had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life. Some fun, Bobby Lee said. Shut up, Bobby Lee, misfit said. It's no real pleasure in life. Well, that was fun. Not really sure what the moral of the story is, but I mean, I guess that was interesting. What do you guys think? Tyler's asking if he's the Zodiac. Maybe. Actually, it reminds me a little bit of a short story that I wrote. I don't remember if I read it on stream once. It was the precursor to that other short story I wrote. I wrote that one, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and that was actually a sequel to a short story I wrote called, I think I called it Silence Prevails, which is about a family that gets murdered. It reminded me of that a little bit. Just that kind of slow descent into madness. Kimmery says she was pretty confused by the story. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I understood what was going on. I just don't understand why, you know? Like, I don't understand the point of this story. I mean, I guess I could look up an analysis of it. Let's look it up. Here's Spark Notes. Let's see what the themes of the story were. The grandmother applies the label good indiscriminately, blurring the definition of a good man until the label loses its meaning entirely. She first applies it to Red Sammy. She first applies it to Red Sammy after he angrily complains of the general untrustworthiness of people. He's more gullible than he's a gullible man, Red Sammy, which doesn't necessarily make him a good man. But then she insists that the misfit must be a good man. It kind of seems like, I don't know, like false equivalence. Like she calls the first guy good. She calls Red Sammy good because he's trustworthy. Like, yeah, he is gullible, but he agrees with her perspective. And then the second time she calls the misfit good is because she's afraid for her life. So it doesn't really seem like it's the same thing. The grandmother's wanton application of the label good man reveals that good doesn't imply moral or kind. Well, she's just afraid for her life. Tyler says he doesn't like language misfit. It's too wholesome for a guy like him. Yeah, I mean, I guess that could play into that same theme of mislabeling people, I guess. Christianity. What? Okay, I understand. So, like, it says here she instructs the misfit to pray, even though she is unable to formulate her own coherent prayer. She kind of loses her faith in her. It says here the misfit for his part is an unrepentant murderer. Both bad people, both she and the misfit are bad people in their own way. They are unlikely, even undeserving recipients of grace. Grace, however, settles on them both, suggesting that even people like the grandmother and the misfit have the potential to be saved by God. What? Like her biggest like she's just afraid. That's all it is. That's all it is. She's terrified and she can't think straight. And maybe she's in a little bit of denial, but what? Her comments seem inappropriate, even insane, given the circumstances, but this is actually the grandmother's most lucid moment in the story. Okay. What? Killing. Okay, so the Misfit 2 is open to grace at the end. He had claimed earlier there was no pleasure in meanness in life, but now he denies there is any pleasure in life at all. Killing is suggesting that he too may harbor the possibility to change. Okay. Okay, I don't know why this is considered. I mean, it certainly is interesting. Whatever. Whatever. I don't even know anymore. And nostalgia and the N-word and all this stuff. That's what makes a good story. Well, I hope you guys at least enjoyed listening to me talk. For some reason it took me a little bit to catch up and realize that it was set in Georgia and therefore would have a little bit of a southern drawl. I only picked up on that because some of the dialogue is written to have the accents in it. I like doing accents, but it took me a while to realize that. Yeah, I don't even know. Like I said, I'm still kind of tired. I might even just end the stream a little early tonight. Maybe I'll do a little more, like a small reading. But unfortunately, like I said, I took a big long nap. Still not enough because of work, but I won't go into that because I'm tired of complaining. But anyways, it's a lot of fun stuff. I guess moving on from that, I do want to ask a little bit. Kimmery and I think Shelby to a smaller extent have been wanting me to read And Then There Were None, which is a book, not a short story, an actual book. And I had kind of thought about reading books on stream, and I've got, now I've got a list of them. I've got things like that one, which I think I could get away with reading, maybe. But I also have, I have that selection of fiction, which Agatha Christie is actually, even though she wrote mystery books, um, they were very insightful and they're considered classic literature now. Uh, Very timeless, very applicable, very indicative of culture. They're great books, as far as I can tell. I haven't actually read the one, but I did see the a movie adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express, and I liked it a lot. Um, Anyways, I think I could get away with probably reading, and then there were none on the stream. The only thing is, I'm wondering if, because the thing about short stories is that if they suck, you don't lose like a lot of time. If people get bored, you can kind of move on. Like with reading fairy tales, like I kind of started out with, I could read those and um, I could spend a night reading them, and then the next week I'd come back and I'd be like, "Do you guys still want to read fairy tales?" And you might be like, "No, let's read something else." So it's like, okay, I'll find something else. The problem is that if I start a book, I can't necessarily do that, or I can, but it's not as smooth of a transition. Like if we were to read and then there were none, uh, I could read, like one chapter a week or whatever we decide to do, and then after a certain amount of time, like if people would change their minds, we'd basically be cutting a book short. If people got bored or whatever. Kimry is suggesting just having a chapter a stream, which is fairly reasonable. I mean, people do that with like video games. Tyler's asking me what the book is about, and then there were none is a murder mystery book. I don't know exactly what it entails, but and also apparently it's pretty short. It's not like The Lord of the Rings or something. Because I know we were reading Manga in Theory and Practice, and we kind of like we were reading that, and I think, I mean, I was interested in what was being said at least. But I know that after, like, we didn't do that much of it, but we still kind of got sick of it. And I'm kind of worried about that happening with other books. Because, like I said, if I just read sporadically, then it's like if it sucks or whatever, it's easy to move on. So obviously, I know what Kimry's vote is, but I'm wondering, Tyler, if you would want to listen to that, or if anyone else is listening to the stream, if they would want to listen to that. Because I'm happy to do that if people think that that's a good idea. Otherwise, I'm probably just going to keep trying to do short stories or riddles or something. I'm not exactly running out of material here. I've got a few things I could read. I guess the only other thing would be having to recap each week. Because, it's one thing. Tyler says he'll listen to anything. That's greatly appreciated. Thank you, Tyler. That actually inspires a lot of confidence in me. So maybe I'll do that. I guess since Kimry wants me to, I'm gonna be meeting up with Shelby this week. I'll be going to Comic-Con, which should be fun. I think I might also cut the stream off early tonight because I'm still I'm out of it, but whatever. What else is new? So we have, as far as books go, we have, and then there were none. So hopefully I'll get that back from Shelby, and if things don't work out, we can always default back to Tyler says he needs to broaden his horizons a bit. That's fair. We're cultural as all crap on this stream. Especially if you guys, I don't know if you guys ever hear me belch or whatever, but definitely cultural. I've got a lot of short form stuff that we could read through. I would still like to read the William Penn autobiography, or the Wikipedia page. And in fact, I have a few people that I think their biographies are interesting enough. Not books, but like just their life story that they would be interesting to read. William Penn was one, because his Wikipedia article is really well written and he's an interesting fellow. F. Scott Fitzgerald is another one. He was an interesting fellow. I'd like to read a bit about him. I also thought Mike Tyson is kind of an interesting figure. A lot of the crap that he's been through, because he's not Mike Tyson. I don't think I'll be reading famous speeches, like Kimmery suggested, unless I have something to say about him, which I probably don't, because I don't like people just like I guess I don't know what the nice way to call it, hugboxing. Um, there's another word that is commonly used to refer to it on the internet, but I don't want to do that because it's a bit crude. But it happens a lot, and I've noticed it in academia in school, and it just bothers the crap out of me. That a lot of it is just hugboxing is, I guess, the best way to describe it. Just like in my linguistics class, there's a lot of stuff about like social. It's a social science, I guess. So there's a lot of like social activism in it. Debate oratories you like. I need to look up oratories first. Maybe one of these days I'll read my paper that I wrote for my intro to writing class, where we had to analyze a bit of rhetoric and write a paper on it. And it ended up being pretty funny because I was just in such a bad mood that I started tearing into this guy for being an idiot. And the teacher thought it was pretty funny. I think I actually still have that paper. I'd have to go digging for it though. So maybe I'll read that one of these days. But anyways, there's a lot of hug boxing where basically like it's not about challenge, it's about just agreeing, if that makes sense. Like rather than challenging ideas or trying to expand or strengthen yourself, it's just about coming to an accord, and not through debate, but just through agreement, which I don't like that. I don't like just plain acceptance. I think you should, especially in college, you should be scrutinizing everything. But the thing is that like with a lot of classes, like like in my linguistics class, we have to do a certain number of, as part of our grade, we do a certain number of volunteer service for the Center for American Indian Languages at the U of U. And their job is to preserve languages of Native Americans that are dying off or what have you. And this sounds like really bad to say, but when I look at that, I just think like, why? Why would you do that? But I can't say that out loud, And there's no like, there isn't a whole lot of debate in the class. It's not like the teacher goes on to explain. Thanks for coming on the stream, Hannah. You've got kind of bad timing because it's almost over, but I appreciate your support. I didn't even send you a text, so you just remembered. So that was nice. Thanks for coming on, Hannah. But anyways, like as far as the explanation for like why why the University of Utah is dedicating hours and whatnot, like you're just supposed to accept that. Like you just have to accept that that's part of the class. And as part of the class, also Hannah, I like that you put that you were twas watching. It's very classy. But no, for real though, thanks for coming on the stream. Always appreciate your support. But anyways, it kind of bothers me, like that for this class, you basically just absolutely have to do volunteer work for this U of U thing. Like, it's not even necessarily a cause you support, but you have to volunteer for it. That's the class. And this isn't like, it's just an introduction class, So like a lot of us are just passing through. It's I don't know. It rubs me the wrong way. And it's not even that it doesn't have value, but like um because there is like a psychological or sociological aspect to preserving old languages and cultures. But like, you don't make that decision. You just get in the class and they just put you right to work. And if you don't do it, you fail the class. Which to me feels like I'm kind of like, maybe this is a little dramatic, but it feels sort of like being held prisoner because I don't have a say in it. And it's not like this particular thing is necessarily challenging. It's not like it's an understanding. It's just time consuming. So rather than learning about myself, or not necessarily myself, but rather than learning a subject, I'm just helping people out, which I know it's the end of the world helping other people's out. But like, that seems like something you would need to do of your own volition, rather than something that they tell you to do. And maybe I'm just nitpicking. Maybe I'm just a grumpy jerk and I don't want to help, which is probably true. But I don't know. It bothers me, and it's just kind of part of this hug box mentality, where it's better to accept than to challenge. Because I can't challenge the teacher and be like, well, I don't want to do service for this thing that I don't necessarily understand, what good it does. I understand now what good it does, but I didn't at the time. And I didn't learn that through the volunteer service. I just learned it because of the class, or kind of doing some of my own reports, not actually doing the volunteering. But like, at the beginning of the semester, I could not have challenged my teacher on that because there was no way for me to walk away from that argument looking like a good person. I would just look like an ignorant a-hole that really hates Native Americans for some reason, which isn't true. I don't know. Maybe it's nitpicking. Maybe I'm just defensive when I shouldn't be. But I see that a lot in academia, that there's a lot of acceptance. And for me, I would rather have somebody challenge something. The reason I brought this up is because Kimry suggested reading famous speeches. And I don't want to do that because, like, I think of a famous speech, I think of like Kimry's going offline. Thanks for coming online, Kimry. Have a good night. Sleep well. Don't let the bed bugs bite. Hi off to bed. I'm Kimry, etc., etc. But like, if I were to read something like, I have a dream. Like, maybe you could challenge the I have a dream speech, but would you want to? Because that's like a symbol for, like civil rights activism. So if you were to challenge it, like, even if you had a legitimate argument to be had, people would just automatically see you as a douchebag. And then, and I'm not even saying there is anything wrong with the I have a dream speech. I'm just giving that as an example because I don't know much about that speech, if I'm being honest. I did, however, write a paper on JFK's inaugural address, which is around that similar time frame. And it's a similar thing where, like, it's just like there's nothing to argue. There's no debate to be had. It's a thing, So that's the thing about famous speeches, is that they're famous usually because people want to agree with them. And even something like Hitler's speeches, like, people don't necessarily, it's not famous because people agree with them, but it's famous because people agree to disagree on them. And it becomes a symbol for evil and rallying powers and all that jazz. So that in and of itself is kind of, I guess that's one insight to have. But Anyways, the point is I don't necessarily want to do something unless there's something to be said about it. And maybe that falls on me. Maybe I'm not brave enough or whatever. Hannah suggested challenging the teacher. No, because A, the semester's almost over, and B, she is actually a nice person, and I don't want to. I don't want to be that guy, you know. Um, but she is a nice person. She's been willing to work with us. She's very patient. Um, she's very kind. You know, she doesn't seem to have a mean bone in her body. So I don't want to do that. But hopefully I pass this semester because I don't know if I'm doing well enough to pass my linguistics class. Anyways, we've been streaming for just shy of 2 hours now. Thank you all for coming on. It's been real. It wasn't a whole lot this week because we spent a lot of time reading stuff that's kind of boring, and me, half of it was me complaining about school, and the other half was me reading a story that I didn't end up having much to say about. And you can kind of see my point that, like, with that story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, I don't have anything to say. And maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I'm not thinking right. But anyways, Hannah is apologizing. You don't have to do that, Hannah. I'm honestly just glad that you remembered this stream, that you came back on. It means a lot to me. So thanks guys for coming on stream. I'll try and complain a little less next week. Don't know how well it's gonna go. Next week, I think we'll try reading an actual book. If not, and then there were none, I'm gonna pick one of those free books that I had listed, that I have a list for, and read one of those. We'll try out the long form serialized thing. We'll see how that goes. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We'll go back to short form. In the meantime, however, I hope you all have a good week. Sleep well, eat your vitamins, and dream of large women. Have a good night.